All right, welcome. Thank you for joining us today, Tuesday, October 15th. We are thankful for our panel members and those in attendance for our quarterly meeting, uniting our bicycle industry retailer and supplier best practices panel. This panel was formed earlier in 2024 as an advocacy effort on behalf of the NBDA to unite the industry to take action to formulate best practices for retailers and suppliers going forward. Conversations around inventory, margins, reduced foot traffic, changing technology, human resources, and changing in consumer spending habits have prompted us to take action in these quarterly panel meetings to navigate best practices forward. The conversation today will be over an hour and a half, so about 90 minutes, and we'll cover 3 topics that have been presented to us from our panel members and industry members at large. I appreciate the panel members who have volunteered their time and expertise to today's discussion. A lot of energy has gone into making this platform a valuable resource for both retailers and suppliers. We want to work united, and we truly believe that this collective conversation will propel us forward towards continuous growth in ridership, sales, and overall industry health. Thank you, panel members, for being here. I know many of our retailer attendees are viewing as a participant. Thank you for being here as well. As we move forward today, please use the chat function to place any questions or comments that you want to lend to the conversation. Throughout the panel event, the members of the panel and the National Bicycle Dealers Association will monitor the chat, and some questions may be answered live, while others addressed back via chat. Assisting in today's presentation is NBDA Board Chair Peter Henry, who will open us up with a few words for the good. Peter?
Oh, thank you, Heather. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you here. Thanks to Alicia and Heather for putting this event together. Thank you, panelists, for being here and being willing to speak up about yourselves, amongst other things. And thanks to all of you for caring about how we can make our industry a better place for our businesses to thrive and our employees to work, how we can better serve our cyclists, the public, and our communities. We have 3 topics today, which in a way are all about bike shops negotiating with suppliers for the best deal, or at least asking suppliers to improve their systems to make things easier for us. All too often when we talk about programs, it feels transactional in nature. Suppliers just asking dealers to buy now and to make promises into the future. Too often, the reason for the programs feels like I need to make my numbers, which doesn't really inspire retailers to try to accomplish a lot. The freight allowance question becomes all about how to get the best price for the products all in arrived at my store. Again, not real inspiring. But we can take a step back and look at the purpose for each of these conversations. If we are truly building partnership-type relationships, we need to go a lot deeper. Ideally, dealers would have a good idea of how much they expect to need from a supplier and when they expect to need it. And this needs to be brought up in the conversation, totally aside from whatever the the milestones and windows are in the stock program. There should be some effort by the supplier to meet those needs. The supplier also needs to be honest about the limitations on their ability to meet them. I mean, you can't just up and do everything that everybody wants. That's going to be too expensive. We need to talk about what problems are we each facing, what opportunities do we see. We need to be forthright when we talk about our continuing and new strategies and strategies into the future. Bike shop owners want to show suppliers that selling to shops like theirs, selling to their shop in particular, is a smart strategy for that supplier into the future. Suppliers want to show the shop owner that investing their time and energy in buying and selling their brand is a smart move for them and for their life, not just this year, but also into the future. Because whatever you're doing this year is building what you're going to do next year, and you want to put it into brand suppliers, people that you want to have a relationship with, people that you like doing business with, partly because you like them, but also because they treat your business squarely and fairly. When we're really fully honest in these conversations, we tend to build trust no matter what happens. When we talk about, here's what I'm going to be doing this year, and even when the world throws monkey wrenches in your way, you can still do what you said you're going to do, or reasonable accommodations to what's happened to that. And so you can build trust even when things go badly. The other two topics now just become details in this bigger conversation. The freight is all a question about how much product does the retailer expect to need? When do they want it? How big will each order be? And so then programs need to be designed both by the retailer and the vendor to get that buying desire met in a cost-effective way that keeps product fairly continuously available to consumers. That's really important to a supplier, is that their product always be available. So if you go with a program, which, all you ship is full containers, but you got lots of inventory for a month or two, and then you got a month or two where you're out of half your stuff, you're not going to make a lot of sales during that month where you're out of a lot of stuff, and the supplier is not well served by that. So it's having a good, honest conversation, and there has to be attention to what's cost effective for the supplier if they're paying for the shipping, but it also has to be producing profitability. So in a way, which is more important is kind of the wrong question. It's more about how do you put together a package that optimizes for a variety of needs, or that meets a variety of needs and optimizes your success. Likewise, the B2B systems is that's really about having conversation about, okay, let's put some energy when we're not flat out with customers because we're getting into the slower part of the year into improving the systems, so that we don't spend our time in May focused on, how do I keep these invoices sorted out? And gee, these credits are all screwed up. We want to, at that time, be focusing on taking care of our customers, taking care of their bikes, getting people excited about riding. And that's really what builds our future. So, so these conversations are kind of about details for today, for here and now. But I'm really hoping that this panel conversation will help to inspire and inform a lot of really good one-on-one conversations in the coming months and coming years, so that we really go deeper and start building better and more trusting relationships. So again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, as Peter just elegantly overviewed, in today's meeting, we have 3 topics for exploration. One is 2025 pre-seasons, another weighing freight discounts versus margin increase, and the final B2B systems and possible improvements. Having this conversation about these 3 topics is very timely, and I'm very thankful once again to our panel members. Several brands have shown up to lend their voice into these conversations. I see Bull's Bike, Hayes, QBP. These are important conversations, and it's nice to see our brands support these conversations to provide feedback. We have several retailers also on the call. It's important to the NBDA that retailers and suppliers are both profitable and healthy. So the conversation is meant to share viewpoints that hopefully, if we all hear them, it'll drive our industry forward. So once again, I'm thankful to the panel members. So the 3 topics for exploration, as I said, they're very timely, and they were provided to the National Bicycle Dealers Association in a response for a call to topics to our membership base at large. So how the forum will progress today is I will read the topic questions, then our panel members who have volunteered to speak on the topics will talk at will, and then we'll solicit any topics or any comments from panel members or those in attendance. So for our attendees, if you wish to comment as well, please indicate that by raising your hand or placing a note in the chat. Before we get going, I asked a good friend of mine, Rob Kaplan from Bulls Bikes, to give us opening special presentation about managing inventory to the benefit of dealer profitability and supplier relations. Those who joined us at our last panel may remember that we did cover this as a topic for deeper exploration. However, I believe that it's still very timely due to the conversations I've been having in my P2 groups about turns and GEMROI and just-in-time ordering. I wanted to put a refresher up, and I thought that Rob did a great job summarizing this last time. So Rob, will you open us up with a special presentation overview? Thank you.
Sure thing. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you've all got me. So thanks, Heather. Thanks to everybody who is on the call. Sorry about that. Let me get back there. First off, I do want to send warm thoughts and support to all those who've been suffering through the recent weather events. I know there's a few of you on the call. If Bulls can do anything to help, or if I can do anything to help, please don't hesitate. And I also just want to call out sending sympathy and support to the Cozy family on the passing of Ron, who I think almost everybody on this call knows who he was, and probably many of us knew Ron and know Paul. So, and thanks, Heather, for asking me to recap from the last meeting. This topic, in my view anyway, and the first topic that I'm also going to present on really go hand in hand. And you've all heard me say this. I will say that sometimes I feel, to some extent on these calls, like I'm preaching to the choir. If you're on these calls, generally speaking, you at least get it. And my ask is, if you know somebody else who should be on the call, either a competitor or another shop owner or manager or worker that is not in your area or even is in your area, just clue them in. Tell them what kind of great content the NBDA supplies, and try to get more people on, because I tend to see the same faces. We love you all, but I think the key is getting more people to understand these messages. So without further ado, inventory and brand management. I'm a big believer, and again, it's easy for me to say this. We're a small supplier. Retailers should manage the suppliers and inventory, not the other way around. As a retailer, you're the brand. And I know that most of you understand this, and most of you ascribe to this theory, but it's really important, especially in the current environment of direct-to-consumer and company-owned stores and things of that sort. You're the brand, and your store is the reason, and you personally are probably a lot of the reason that your customers come in to see you. Your curation of products should mean something to your customers. I've heard this stated, and I think it's a really good statement in general. On the sales floor, we've looked at dozens of bikes in this category and believe our assortment offers the best options and represents the best value for our customers. I think those words convey something really important and allow you as the shop owner, store manager, employee, et cetera, to really lean into, we're looking out for our customers. Your customers trust you. They come to you for your expertise and the experience. And part of that experience is choice. And I really believe this, and the evidence is now in multi-brand and owner-operated equals better results than mono-brand or brand operated. And this has been now proven by the results of many of the recent brand retail roll-up acquisitions. So if you look at some of the larger retailers that were recently being in the last half dozen years or so purchased by a brand, generally speaking, their top line sales have fallen. Many of them have closed certain of their locations. And again, in my view and the view of many people in the industry now, it really is true that your store operated by an owner-operator offering choice to the consumer is going to result in better sales results and better overall experience for the consumer. And while it's important to limit your vendors, consumers like reasonable choice. So I think you need to align with brands that understand this. And if you have to align with a brand that doesn't seem to understand it, you need to manage the brand. What do you really need? What do your customers really need? Back in the day, we used to talk about draw brands, profit brands, and niche brands. And I still think that has a lot of value in how you assort today. There's no question that some brands consumers know, most brands consumers don't know. In my previous company life, we did some consumer surveys, and the results of those surveys amongst non-cyclists are really quite startling. The brands that we all know in the industry aren't necessarily brands that non-cyclists know instinctively. Believe it or not, Schwinn is still one of the most widely recognized bicycle brands in the country. And then also buy at levels that make sense for your store. Don't be afraid to ask for more. I think that every brand these days is really interested in securing their positioning in your store. And I would say that most brands, certainly smaller brands, offer some flexibility to get that level of support in your store. And don't let brands bully you. Do they really have a better choice if you say, no, I'm not going to buy at that level? And remember, and this is the most important,
It appears that Rob has gotten frozen. We have a Zoom technical difficulty. We're going to go ahead and stop his screen share. His information is so valuable. Francis, if you would go ahead and stop his screen share and we'll move forward. He might need to log out and log back in. It's fantastic information that Rob shares with us. Okay, apologies for that. Zoom gave us a little technological issue. We thank Rob for his addition to the conversation there. Does anyone else, any other panel member wish to speak on the supplier retailer relationship and any thoughts on what Rob was sharing? All right. I would like to.
Heather, I can jump in, Heather.
Thanks,
So
Todd.
this is kind of my first time being on the panel. So first time caller, long time listener, great topic. Love the show. Listening to what Rob has been talking about kind of brought me back to when we were in Bentonville for the summit, and just the presentation that James from Harrow had given, just about, there's a lot of brands out there, and making sure that, who you're choosing to do business with is a two-way street, that, you're not just working with suppliers who are forcing you into their direction, but ones that you're finding give and take with, because you may often find that some companies' programs aren't going to work for you based on the size of your business, or things of that nature. So in those cases, don't hesitate to ask. Just because you can't meet a full program requirement doesn't mean that a supplier like ourselves, don't want to do business with you and don't want to partner with you. And sometimes it's having those conversations. And again, to steal that quote, find those two-way streets to make things work for you.
Thank you, Todd. It was great to have you at the summit event, and I appreciate your share here. It's important reminders, and it doesn't hurt to ask and say what you need as a retailer, but also as a brand or supplier, say what you need. Okay, let's move forward then to our first topic for exploration today. This topic is titled 2025 Preseason Retailer Strategies and Brand Support. And the question reads, how are retailers approaching their 2025 preseason planning? And what key actions can brands take to best support retailer programs forward? We had Rob Kaplan as a speaker on this. Hopefully he'll be able to join us back in. Would any retailers on the panel like to talk about what your thoughts are regarding 2025 preseasons? Okay, we had just a couple retailers on the call. So I will tell you from the feedback from our P2 groups, we've been having our in-person meetings lately, and it seems that our P2 retailers, which is about 80 retailers across North America, their strategies are diverse, but in general, most are looking for just in time or to form stronger relationships with brands and be very narrow in their products that they're choosing. So not a breadth of products, but very narrow and moving to that just in time. Would any other panel members who represent brands like to talk about what you're seeing with suppliers who are, or with retailers who are reaching out, or just your thoughts on 2025 preseason? Benton.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I'll add some thoughts. So I'm Benton, Director of National Sales for QBP. We do a fair amount of pre-books through QBP, but I can't say we're one large brand that certainly forces pre-books on retailers. I think we're more flexible than some. My thoughts on pre-book this year is that one, we're all very, very rusty from the last 4.5 to 5 years of whatever that was in terms of securing inventory to where we are at today. But we look at pre-books, certainly from my standpoint, as a little bit different than what they have been in the past, where suppliers, QBP, as well as other brands, I'm sure on this call, are looking to right-size our inventory as much as our retailers are looking to right-size their inventory. And pre-books do have their place in that, right? QBP doesn't pre-book inventory that we haven't already placed on order. So we're not asking our retailers to place POs so that we can place POs. However, it does give us a future look into what demand from our retailer base is, much to Peter, your point earlier. It's like, how do we ensure that we have the support inventory coming in to support the retailers who do choose to support the brands we are pre-booking? And I think now that's more important than it ever has been in the past, where brands or distributors like Q may be a little more hesitant to go heavier on-hand inventory to support just-in-time, which is where QBP really stands in the industry. We believe strongly in just-in-time inventory, but we also don't want to continue to be upside down. So there is importance in pre-book now in ordering what you think you are going to need, not more, and certainly not trying to hit a buy threshold that is unhealthy for your business. I'm 100% with Rob on that, but placing those orders strategically, knowing that flexibility is going to be needed, both from a supplier standpoint, which QBP, I'm happy to say we're quite flexible there, and from a retailer standpoint, to note that there will be stockouts, both with brands that I represent, but of course brands across the industry, as we figure out the on-hand inventory conundrum that we are kind of all in. And so I think there are some pushback from retail in my experience this year as we approach 2025 season of like, I don't want to pre-book, I'm heavy on inventory. But there's also pushback from my side that says if you don't pre-book it, you might not get it when you need it as well. And so how do we find a middle ground and have that constructive conversation, say what's healthy for your business so that we can ensure that you're not calling me in May and saying, why don't you have this? We need to have that conversation now so that we can both supplier and retailer plan together. So that's my take on it. And I'm open to any questions if anybody has them.
Thank you, Benton. Any questions from the panel or any additional discussion? And Rob, we're happy to have you back on the call. Yeah, Zoom is doing that thing today. It's all good. We have moved on to the first topic of exploration, which is the preseason. And we do have some feedback from some retailer attendees as well. So Benton was just describing some of the thoughts of quality bicycle components, but let me just go over here. We have a couple comments from retailers. From a retailer in Rhode Island, the preseason has been extra messy this season. I've lost a key rep and had several preseason requests that made no sense to participate in. And then we also have from a retailer in Vermont, we have cut back greatly on pre-orders, specifically around the more niche brands. And as retailers and business owners, we have the ability to push back on pre-orders. And we're doing that with a reasonable discussion. So some feedback there from our retailers. Rob, you had suggested that you'd like to comment on this. would you like to go ahead and share your thoughts?
Sure. Sorry about that. I don't know where I got cut off, but I was going to share a screen, but I'm not going to chance that again. I'm just going to talk through. I do think that I heard Benton speaking, and I do agree that preseason should be used very judiciously these days. The need to book a lot of bikes, like was the norm, maybe 6 or 10 years ago. I don't know why anybody would do that, to be honest. I was saying during my earlier presentation that I think assorting wide and shallow makes a lot of sense, and leaning into special orders. I also think that if you're going to preseason and take bikes now and you sell them before the bill is due, do yourselves a favor and pay that part of the bill early. I think it's really important that you not rob Peter to pay Paul. That is a very common thing in the bike industry, it seems, and it's sort of the death spiral, if you will, and it really gets people in trouble. So I'd really encourage you to do that. And if you do pay your bill early, ask for anticipation. Anticipation is something that almost every brand offers, and even if they don't, nothing wrong with asking. And then I also was going to say that, I know that, again, it's easy for smaller brands to say this, but every brand is looking to secure their floor space. And that means that if you have been a good partner and you're offering to support that brand, asking for something more, asking for an exception, I don't see anything wrong with it. I've always been a big fan of you don't get if you don't ask. And having been in the sales game for a long time, I know that retailers like to ask, brands like to ask also. But I think, be willing to ask for something that maybe you weren't thinking you would get 6 or 10 years ago. You might be surprised at the answer. I also think that it's really important not to let your brands bully you. Remember, they need you more than you need them. That the reality is most brands don't have better choices in your market than you. And while a lot of brands like to say, oh, we'll just go down the street and we'll open up the guy down the street, and if you don't do the big preseason, that's their threat. I think in reality, it's pretty rare that happens. And I would be a big fan of making sure you know that when you're talking, especially to your bigger brands, and sell in more reasonable. And as a brand, so now switching to my brand hat, I think it's really time to show support and partnership. Financial health is critical. And as a brand, loading up your dealers doesn't guarantee they're going to pay on time or at all. So if you sell in more reasonable quantities, chances are you're going to get paid on a more regular basis. And just-in-time inventory is definitely back. But this is really important. And I've been on the losing end of this quite a bit. This is where partnership is important. If the brand plays nice and doesn't load you up, as a retailer, it's really important that you reciprocate by treating everyone the same and by not allowing another brand to load you up. So, as a brand, it's always a double-edged sword for us because we want to play nice, especially us smaller brands. But then we come back, a month later and the retailer says, oh, I had to take that big preseason from XYZ brand, and as a result, I have no open to buy, no room in my warehouse, no room on my floor, et cetera. And I think it's really important that retailers play fair with everyone that they're playing with, and again, not allow their brands to load them up and block other brands. So thanks for that, Heather.
Thank you, Rob. Some great points and reminders there. I really, really like this question. I think it's really important. We have some more comments coming from retailers, from a retailer in Georgia. Anytime a brand asks you to buy at levels that are not healthy for your business, they're not a good partner. And from a retailer in Maryland, we are the brand. Train your customers to understand that, like a good travel agent, the brand of the carriers and accommodations are secondary at best. Peter, Henry, I see your hand up as well.
Yeah, your suppliers, if you're a retailer, your suppliers come to you with, here's our program for the year. Now, if you're really planning your business And even if you haven't ever planned it before, you kind of know what your sales are likely to be month by month into the future. I mean, they're probably going to be about the same as last year's. And, you know, you can hope you can nudge them up a few percent. And you hope you don't have them nudge down more than 1% or 2. But that's, you know, reasonably close. You have an idea how much inventory you can afford to have in and still be able to pay your bills. And what your inventory is going to be is, what do you bring in during a month? What do you sell during a month? So you can figure out, okay, how much am I going to need to bring in each month to hit the inventory I can afford to have, and to you know, have the inventory I need to make my sales. So there's your program. There's how much inventory, how much product you're going to want each month. Now you can't tell how many of model XYZ you're going to need in April, but you can know I'm going to need whatever it is, you know, 50 or 100 or 200 bikes in April. And so put that together and say, okay, here's my program. Here's about what I expect to be needing this month. And if they say, oh, you're not meeting our program, we can't give you the benefits, let's tell them, hey, it's been a pleasure knowing you for these years, but this is what we need. And I'm sure there are plenty of suppliers out there who are going to be happy to do that. And I'm sure we have suppliers here who will speak up to the truth of that. And almost invariably, I mean, it's really, really rare. I think in my entire career, I think it happened once that a supplier hasn't said, oh, no, we want to be the ones to do that for you. And, you know, people say, oh, well, Landry's could do that because Landry's was big. No, Landry's became big because we did that, is much more the truth.
Thank you, Peter. From a retailer, Matthew Wallen from Round Trip Bike Shop, who's a panel member. Matthew?
Yeah, so I'm just listening, and you asked the question about how we can, as retailers, support the suppliers better, right? And through all the conversations and through all the different years that I've gone through preseason or not chosen to participate in preseason for whatever the reason, the conversation really has never been about how the supplier, like, what are our needs as a shop. There's some generalizations and maybe some like program that comes out, but it seems to be kind of serving the supplier more than necessarily the retail shops. And so I'm not sure what the exact answer is, but I know that there's never really been like anything that's asked me directly, like, what is it that you need? I've never heard anything or seen anything go out from the suppliers saying, what are the needs of the shops? With a few rare exceptions. There's a few that have done the research and answered. And I think right now, like a lot of companies that are working with just-in-time inventory and making that happen, I think that that's something that I think that that's IBD driven. And I think that the suppliers that are supporting that, I think they're getting that, but some of the suppliers still are putting out programs that have like this huge ask before you see any kind of benefit whatsoever. And so there's not really much of an incentive to do a program. You might not drop the brand per se, but there's not much incentive to participate in any kind of program other than, because you're not going to hit those tiers anyway. So the tiers are unreachable for some of the smaller shops like myself. And so I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, all this feedback is really important. And I do have an attendee, Phil Cohen from Chain Reaction, Georgia, who would like to lend his thoughts as well. Phil?
Thank you. I was just curious. There seems to be a really, really big disconnect between the sales side of brands and the credit side of brands. And I know this because when I talk to the credit people and ask them how they're doing, the salespeople load up these, not people like us who are going to push back like me and Peter, but they're going to load up these naive dealers. They're going to set them up for failure. And then now the mess is on the credit person. They've got to try to collect. Then these people are in cash flow hell and they're dumping product and it just distorts the market and nobody wins. So why can't the credit people and the sales people come up with a program that is a win-win-win? You're going to sell through to me. I'm going to pay for it on time and I'm going to buy more. And your credit people don't have to chase my money and it's just the market's not distorted, because once a bad dealer starts discounting, it affects the whole market. So, there's got to be a better way. And it sounds like people like Rob and some other people understand that, and they're making it. And those are the people we should support in the future. And like Peter says, the brand on outside my building is my brand, more important than any other brand I sell. So just my 2 cents.
No, thank you, Phil. I appreciate you making that connection too, because that's very important. I think Rob Kaplan might have some thoughts about that as well. Rob?
Well, just from my experience, that in many organizations, there's a firewall between sales and credit. I've always felt like in sales, my job is to keep my dealers current and help them pay their bills on time. So, but that's a personal opinion, and I've had run-ins with credit departments on that subject, and I can't say that every brand is like that. Again, to Phil's point, I think it really comes down to, as a dealer, you need to manage your brands and not be bullied. I keep saying it, but it sort of is appropriate, I think, in this conversation as well.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, and Paul, I see your hand up. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you, Heather. I just wanted to say there's some good stuff happening in here, and what Rob threw out earlier was just a lot of great information. But I forget who the gentleman was who was just talking about right before Rob chimed in there. But I just want to say something with regard to where this meeting is right now. But anyway, on the supplier side, I am a partner in Defeat, and we do make socks. That's soft goods, different from bicycles and so on. But I would say the more that you can align, the more that we can align with each other in this industry, from dealers through suppliers and so on, with groups that have the ability to make just-in-time inventory, that have the ability to make product in this country, I think it helps solve some of these issues. It's harder to find, and I don't mean to step on any toes on anyone in this meeting who's, bringing product in from other countries and whatnot. But it's a challenge for all of us to be able to, it will be, when you can make product just in time, or make it in this country in smaller amounts, or be able to make it after the orders come in, instead of having it in warehouses and boxes and so on, that was ordered a year in advance and tied up a bunch of capital, the better off we'll all be. That's part of creating more efficient, stronger supply chains. So I'm just saying that if we can find each other and create partnerships with suppliers, manufacturers that can actually do this, it should help alleviate some of these issues.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to Defeat for all the support you have been giving the victims of Hurricane Helen. That's been very gracious of you and your team.
Thank you.
And Paul brings up a really good point. Eric, I see your hand up, but I just want to ask the panel members too, because historically pre-seasons have been used as a guide, a tool for brands to forecast. So how, we're going to talk about all the things that retailers should do, but how can retailers support brands or suppliers in their forecasting needs? It has to be a two-way street. So if we're not giving these big pre-seasons, we do need to give our brands and suppliers some indicators so they can, facilitate that they have the right products in stock. So I just want to speak on that too. Eric, did you want to chime in, or you want to just hold off for right now? I saw your hand up.
I just add quickly, Paul brought up alignment, and Rob was talking about it a little bit as well. I think part of the disconnect is on the measurement and incentive piece. How are salespeople being measured and incented, and how are credit people being measured and incented? And if you're incented on unit sell-through, you really don't care about margin and collections, et cetera. And so to the extent that, and I'm not speaking for my organization specifically, I'm just speaking in general, is that there needs to be kind of that alignment between how are we measuring the sales organization, and how are we incenting both the sales organization, the marketing organization, and the finance piece? So I just quickly wanted to add, I think that's a huge opportunity to dig into a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And Rob, did you have something as well?
Well, I was just going to say that to me that goes hand in hand, the sort of, giving suppliers information they can use to forecast is part and parcel to what models will you stock as a retailer. And that's why, again, I'm a big fan of saying I'm going to stock wide and deep instead of narrow and wide and shallow rather than narrow and deep. But keep in mind, folks, that by the time you make a purchase decision from a preseason, most brands have already placed their POs, well into next year. So the ability for us to change forecasting is really minimal these days, unless it's a multi-year model, at which point, yes, it helps. But again, those purchase orders have been placed for quite a bit. So part of it is forecasting, and part of it is what models we support. That gives the brand a little bit more information to go on. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot here. Let's take a couple more questions here, Paul, or comments, Paul.
Yeah. So, forgive me if I've been a little out of touch. I don't know how much discussion that there's been in recent months here just about the cost of capital. And, we've come off, 40 or 50 years now where we've had declining interest rates, and just the economics of forecasting inventories and so on. We're dealing with higher interest rates, of course. And I don't know if anyone really believes that this is something that's going to go away anytime soon, that we're going to go back to these super low interest rates that are going to allow us to basically throw caution to the wind, make huge forecasts, put product into warehouses and so on, and not have to really think about what the actual capital cost of that is. So now all of that carries such a huge burden, and it's something that everyone has to think about, from hardware makers doing their own forecasting, placing their orders, and someone is going to have to pay for this down the line, and it's probably going to end up with more inflation and higher costs for the consumer at some level. So anyway, it's just something to really be cognizant of, and I don't know how much discussion there has been here, because to me that's part of the big challenge of this industry, is how to deal with this capital conundrum.
Yeah, Paul, it's a really good point you brought up, and we haven't spoken much about that yet, but I do see some panel members nodding their head in agreement that that is part of the larger issue. And for our attendees, we are having some feedback and questions come into the Q&A. There was some feedback from a retailer who said that he did decide to drop a couple suppliers when they couldn't hit the numbers that they were being asked to meet, and the suppliers moved on, but then eventually did come back. So just another notion there to advocate for what you need for your shop. And then just anticipation used to change, and retailers don't want to owe money at this point, so they're moving to this more just in time. And then just a question if there's any surveys that could help define what products are going to sell and when. And I think getting that data, I know Peter Woolery has been doing a lot of research and work and kind of collecting that data so we can collectively as an industry make better informed decisions. Anything else from the panel members? Oh, I see a couple of hands go up. Matt from Round Trip Bike Shop.
I keep jumping around, so I can't unmute myself. So we haven't really talked about the fact that you guys that are suppliers have, in most cases, some kind of a sales rep, right? And so a lot of times the sales reps, I see it even in the panel, in the comments for chat and stuff like that they see that rep one time a year. And so I was a rep in the motorcycle industry a long time ago, and I was a very much younger man. And back then we only got paid on what what paid out. So like if we had somebody that didn't pay their bills, we didn't get paid. So the onus was a little bit on the sales staff to be able to get to know the retailers and get to know those people that we were selling to and find out what their needs were, so that we were selling them product, not just what the latest and greatest. Oh, hey, we want to load you up with this super duper XYZ. We were loading them up with, or selling them products that they actually needed. We had to get to know those people and figure that out. And I think that there's kind of a disconnect with some sales reps. And I'm not saying, oh, there's some really fantastic reps out there, obviously. But the majority of reps that are there are not necessarily interested in getting to know the broad base of their dealers. And I think that there could be a little bit more training in that. And there could be more offered in that arena of things for those reps to get to know the people. You're paying them. They're taking money off your bottom line. Money's hard to come by. It's expensive right now. It seems like you'd want to maximize that asset as much as you possibly could. And I don't think it's being done currently right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. This discussion has been great. There's lots of great viewpoints that have been shared, so we can start just thinking about how we could improve the preseason ask and do what's best for retailers and suppliers. For me, I'm coming back to the point that I hear communication is at the heart of all of it. Doing what's best for your business retailers, and then suppliers trying to figure out how you can work with the retailer to grow that relationship. If it starts small, grow it over time into something that truly is a partnership. So lots of things to think about. We won't solve this issue on this 15-minute conversation, but definitely we opened it up a little bit. So I appreciate everyone sharing your viewpoint. I'd like now to move on to our second topic of exploration. This was presented to us by Casper from Fidlock. The topic is, what matters more to bicycle retailers, freight thresholds or margins? So is that lower free freight threshold really what we'd want to see as retailers, or are increased margins more important? And then the flip side of that, what considerations do suppliers face when it comes to the impacts of offering one or the other? We so often as retailers, we might just think, oh, they could give us more margin, but maybe that's not really something that the brand can do. Or we think, oh, they could just give us free freight, but maybe not really. So we want to see both sides of the issues and talk through so we can know what is best for retailers and best for suppliers. Casper was going to intro the conversation, but I'm not sure Casper is on. I'm just checking here. Oh, Casper is a attendee, so I've moved Casper into the panel. Casper, would you like to intro the topic?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I'm the North American sales manager for Fidlock, and we manufacture magnetic cageless bottles and accessories, hip bags, magnetic dry bags, and a cell phone mount system. And we've seen pretty decent growth in 2024, but we're looking to accelerate that in 2025. And I personally spent the first half of my career working in bike shops as an owner, manager, buyer, mechanic, etc. And I understand a lot of the challenges that retailers face, but times have changed, and it's been very challenging the last few years. And so I'm just looking for some insight into the current needs of retailers, when partnering with brands like Fidlock. And so, our current program is free freight at 500 with 44% margin. And I've been talking to a lot of reps and a lot of our accounts and potential accounts, and asking what's, if we can only do one, like you just said, sometimes we can't do both, but if we can do one, what's more important for a brand like ours that's growing and looking for new retailers? A lower free freight. So for example, would you prefer a free freight of 300 with a 44% margin, or a 500 free freight with a 50% margin? So it's just kind of some feedback I'm looking to get with this topic.
Excellent. Casper, I appreciate you bringing it so openly and honestly to this forum, because I think that is a question a lot of brands or suppliers ask themselves. Let me move it over to our speaker then, for a panel member, Peter Woolery from Bicycle Market Research, who would like to share his comments on the topic. Peter?
Thank you, Heather, and I appreciate you bringing this up, Casper. It's a good topic and a pretty complex one. I spent 18 years in bicycle retail as well, so I'm kind of putting on that hat when having this conversation. Just like many of the other panel members here, I was having some technical difficulties today, so I'm going to see if I can share my screen. All right. So I just wanted to give a simple explanation of it and from the perspective. So in this scenario, we see like a $10,000 purchase. Maybe that's high for some brands, but it's a hypothetical one. COGS at 6,000 and 40% gross margin. Here, the retailer is assuming changing shipping costs. So if UPS starts charging more, the retailer has to deal with that. And then you can see the gross margin that shows up on their financials. And this is an example of just a transactional scenario between a brand and a retailer. You reach out to a new brand, I want to buy your stuff, here you go. There's one little nuance here that gets a little bit lost for retailers, is you have this gap between your gross margin and your point of sale and what's in your financials, because shipping ends up going into your COGS in a standard QuickBooks setup. Now, some retailers are diligent enough to always search out the shipping and put it into their point of sale and have that divide across COGS to be really useful. My experience is that's much less common than it really should be. And so there's a challenge there where when they look at the total margin in their point of sale, it's not necessarily what they're going to end up with on the financials. And so you have that knowledge gap. If we look at just discounting the COGS here, you can see that the gross margin goes up. So in this scenario, the brand might say, hey, we want you to stick around, let's make you a dealer, we'll give you gross margin. You still have that gap here. So you're still missing that little bit of information, and you have that shipping cost risk. So if costs go up, the gap between what's in your point of sale and what's in your financials grows even bigger. And that's something to be aware of, is there's a little bit more complexity on the retailer side on their financials here. Now, one benefit is that it does show a higher gross margin for that brand. In these scenarios, which is where most of the retailers are going to be looking at their gross margin by brand or by category. So it looks a little bit rosier in that picture. It's not malicious or anything like that, but it's something to be aware of, that gap that we have. If we flip it over and we say, and if I can do that correctly and make this 4,000, if we say, okay, we're going to keep the gross margin the same, but we're going to do free freight. Here you have matching gross margins, assuming that you paid on time, so you got the freight discount, between point of sale and your financials. What I like about this from a retail standpoint is it's just simpler. You know what it is, and one is going to match the other without having to make sure that you're staying on top of your team. If you're a single store chain, pretty easy to stay on top of your team for it. Multi-store, it becomes more complicated. The downside here is that the brand is assuming the shipping cost risk, right? So as costs go up, the brand's having to deal with that. And eventually, it's just not going to make sense for them to offer, say, that freight threshold or the margins in association with it. And it kind of creeps up in the background, where when they pull that away or they change the threshold, they just end up looking like the bad guys, even though, as pointed out earlier, the cost of capital, the cost of shipping, all these things are going up over time. So it's kind of sneaky. My point in bringing this all up is to echo a lot of what the other panelists have talked about through this discussion, is the communication is most important, right? If as a brand you can put the shipping on your invoices, then it's somewhat moot, right? Then everyone knows when it's received, and it's easier to receive it in there. But then also from the retailer side of things, communicate that upward, ideally with a rep that you have regular conversations with. And if you don't have those regular conversations, reach out to them, tell them, you know, what's going on, even if it's small little feedback. Hey, we did great with this one. And then you establish that relationship, and you can understand one another's businesses. I know some people don't like that partnership phrase, but that's really what it is in an ideal sense, as long as the partnership is two ways and you're both defining it.
Excellent. Peter, thank you so much. I always love how you bring it back to just like the data and how you apply that to the financial side and the impacts on the P&L based on how the freight deduction or the margin might impact the retailer. We had a retailer make a comment in the Q&A. His thought was that free freight on an order of sold just-in-time inventory works better than a higher margin. So that's great feedback to have. Phil Cohen from Chain Reaction Georgia, I had seen your hand up. Did you want to add a comment here?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, it certainly, you know, depending on where you are in your business and your cash flow and capital, you know, freight on a $500 order versus a $50,000 order, or, you know, terms or margin. I mean, at the end of the day, what does it cost me to get that merchandise to my store so I can sell it? That's all that matters. So certainly, you know, understand that, you know, your margins and your point of sale are going to look different if you don't apply that freight evenly. And bigger stores are going to have, you know, the ability to buy larger quantities to get freight more often. But at the end of the day, you know, you can play games with the numbers, move the freight into the margin or take it away. But it's what does it cost? That's all that matters. What does it cost to get the stuff to my door? And I believe that, you know, as someone, as a brand who might ship 10,000 or more bikes a year, your ability to negotiate the freight is a lot better than mine, who ships 50 bikes a year. And then, are you passing that freight along to your dealers in real costs? You know, or is there margin to be made for you on the freight? You know, those are things that I think, you know, that's your business, but those are things that matter. And if I was talking to one of my suppliers, they said that, you know, it used to be freight ran, you know, 6 to 8%. And that certainly, you know, as a brand, you'd rather give up 5% instead of pay 8% on freight. So, you know, you got to figure out what works for you and incentivize the dealers to be efficient and buy in quantities that make sense. So you're not paying, you know, more for freight. But at the end of the day, what does it cost to get it to my store?
Thank you, Phil. Thank you so much. And Peter, would you like to add some comments?
Yeah, and just to put maybe an exclamation point on what Peter was saying, you might have focused a little bit too much on the numbers and not gotten what his real point was. That gap, that difference between what your margin really is and what you get out of your POS means you're working with bad information and you might be making bad decisions because of that. So that being able to come up with a program that includes the cost of freight into the cost of the program, into the cost of the product, will lead to dealers making better decisions, so that gives it a greater importance. And you can agree if I stated what you're getting at, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. Any other panel members want to add thoughts or questions? I did just prompt the retailer attendees who are on the call as well to share in the chat your opinion on this topic. Yeah, Rob.
So I'll just say that if you go back 10 years, the freight cost as a percentage of sales was much lower. And the pandemic really put a spike in this whole thing. And unfortunately, while people have read about ocean freight coming down dramatically, you know, from $4,000 a container to from $20,000 to $4,000 or whatever it is, the reality for brands is that inland freight is such a huge percentage these days as a percentage of sales that it really is, it's hard for us to waver on freight. In the last 2 businesses I worked for, 3 owners in the previous business, freight was like the third rail. You don't ask to override freight. I'd rather give more terms. I'd rather give more of almost anything else than give away freight, just because it is such a huge hard cost for suppliers, specifically for bike suppliers, for finished goods suppliers. So for the retailers that are on there, I know you know this, but just know that, you know, if we could help, we would. But it's a big number. If you saw it on the P&L, you would say, yeah, that we understand. So.
Thank you, Rob. No, this is important to have all the viewpoints. We need this, right? So often we think we can just get free freight, but it's QBP. Ben, your team shared with us at the summit that you're so interested, vested in minimizing the freight costs that you're making boxes in-house. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. We invested in box size machines in all of our DCs to basically ship less air, which has been consistent feedback from our retailers, and free freight thresholds is I would say, a weekly conversation on my desk, for sure, as we balance it out. I mean, we consider everything: trips to the bin, number of lines per order, dollar amount, time of year. All of said, we are a for-profit business like everyone on this call, and so we have to make order sizes that make sense for us, that also are attainable for our retailers. So it's always a delicate balance in between, because as Rob said, you nail on the head, that freight is all over the board, and it spikes and valleys faster now than it ever has in the past. So I think consistency at retail, as a former retailer myself, owner of retail, is easier than here's a different freight or different invoice amount per product every time you get it, because it's much harder to plan. And I think, Phil, what you called out is total cost of procurement. I don't want that to get lost. I think there are individual brands that can come out and say, if you buy $1,000, I'll give you free freight. But what is the cost of having 17 different suppliers and 17 different invoices and 17 different boxes to receive versus potentially 1, 2, 3 suppliers, that take less time? What is the value of your time in there too? And I love, Peter, your very simplified P&L, but there's a massive gap in terms of cost of procurement that goes into that overall margin too, that's not represented there. And I would urge retailers to really consider what that looks like, because there's a pretty easy trap to step into of, if I do this with every single one, I get all of these benefits, and it can add up quickly in terms of time consumption.
Thank you, Benton. I like how we're all listening to each other and just pulling out little parts that everyone is contributing. I have an attendee, a retailer in Vermont. Ian, would you like to chime in?
Sure. Can you guys see me?
We can't see you, but we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Yeah, so on the freight topic, I can certainly respect that, there are plenty of inputs, many of which retailers might not be privy to. But broadly speaking, I mean, over the past, since everything was disrupted since the pandemic, we saw the freight cost of, a standard container skyrocket from, and I'm sorry, numbers off the top of my head, probably not accurate, but $2,000 to $20,000. And, in that environment, it's understandable that some of that cost has to be passed along to the retailer. However, at least in my instance, we haven't really seen those additional freight charges recede. Even, I understand there's been the Red Sea debacle and all that fun stuff, but really, bulk freight prices haven't really come down for us. And I'm just not certain that's something the rest of you are seeing. And now that there's suppliers in here, I'd certainly like to hear from them.
Thank you, Ian, for sharing that. Yeah, and Rob, I think in response, Rob.
So as a supplier, we've seen, again, the freight from Asia to the US come down after the pandemic. It came down significantly. It's ticked back up recently. It's as much as about $6,000 a 40-foot, last I checked last week. So that's ocean freight. Inland freight, as I said previously, has not come down, and we don't expect it to come down anytime soon.
Thank you, Rob. So just some more feedback that's coming in from our retailer attendees. The first is that freight is different depending on what you're ordering. We all know if it's a bike or parts and accessories, and all retailers are handling this differently. If it's a special order, sometimes they'll split the cost with the customer, up to the diverse retailer to decide what is best for them. Some retailers, if they're ordering parts, might hold out until they can reach a free freight threshold. Again, whatever works for the retailer, it could be something that you're doing if you're a retailer yourself. The thing is just managing that fine line to ensure that you're profitable. So some good reminders there. And finally, from a retailer in Florida, he chimed in and just said, maybe we just need to look at MSRP and MAP and talk about that, and making sure that MAP is protected and MSRP is protected, because at the end of the day, it seems like everything's kind of eroding the margin. So we just really want to make sure we're protecting the price point of the item as well. Again, 15, 20 minutes. We're not going to solve this issue, but I hope, Casper, that we provided some good feedback, some good viewpoints for you to utilize in making your dealer program. And I'm sure any panel members or NBDA members would support an additional conversation at one of our member mingle events as well. So thank you to the panel members. I'd like to now move on to topic 3, which is about the B2B platform. So B2B platforms are really great platforms that allow retailers to easily online place orders, view invoices, view credit departments, needs. It just makes for an easy experience for a retailer. We know that B2B platforms have been being enhanced over the past few years, and some are fine-tuned and 100% great to work with, and others are lacking a little bit. The question is, how can vendors enhance these resources for retailers to make them truly a more beneficial resource? The topic was presented to us by Ian Curso from Alpine Bike Works. Ian, would you like to intro the topic? And yep, go ahead, Ian, you're ready.
Okay. Am I able to share my screen? I apologize. First time doing this.
No, that's okay. I think our tech support will let you know when we're ready.
Yep, Ian, I will need you to rejoin as a presenter, so 1 second.
Okay.
So as Ian gets launched back in, does any panel member have thoughts just about this topic, enhancing B2B platforms? It's a beast of a topic. I remember when I was on the supply side, B2B platform is a very expensive thing, but it's a great benefit. Yeah, Rob, I see you there.
Well, so once again, I'll chime in. We always try to make the B2B as useful and as easy to navigate as possible. But Heather, as you said, it is a multi-headed beast, and it is not easy to change platforms or to make enhancements, since almost all of us use a platform that we personalize. The Bulls platform is on the Lightspeed backbone. So, it's a topic that continually gets talked about. My suggestion as a retailer, give the feedback to your brands, tell them what you want. And, when we hear something that we can execute on, we'll do it. And if we can't, we'll tell you why. So that would be my 2 cents.
Yeah, excellent. And Paul, I see you up, but I just want to make sure I can get Ian in to intro the topic. Ian, was there anything else you wanted to say on this topic?
Certainly. I prepared a little slideshow. Again, first time preparing. Bear with me. All right. Can everybody see this?
Yeah, thank you, Ian.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, topic of B2B platforms. This is these are the notes as coming from somebody who's been in the midst of a year-end audit.
Ian, do you have another Zoom open? Try now. Talk now.
Can you hear me?
Perfect, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize. I don't usually do these things. Figured I shouldn't contribute something. So these B2B platforms, fantastic. Obviously, step in the right direction. It benefits all of us. But the user side, the retailer side, and not for all of them, but for certain B2Bs, including for major brands, can use some improvement on the user experience side. So again, being in the midst of an audit, there are a million things to compare, right? So the flow of data, we have information from the B2B, we have information from emails from our representatives, brand reps. Those are fed into sales orders and then invoices, and then employees feed them into purchase orders in the POS system. All of those realms can leave room for user error. Let's not even dive into that. But my main concern lately has been the fact that data points simply aren't aligned for easy reference. So you have an order, you have your master sales order that you submitted, call it a preseason order, right? You have it input into your POS system as a purchase order. Fantastic. That feeds through, you know, your point of sale system, your accounting integration, ultimately into your accounting software. But there can be breakdowns at any point throughout this. So personally, I find it very important to audit all of this information regularly. And a big issue is, you know, your initial sales order is like a balance sheet. It's a snapshot in time. After submitting that order, there can be changes. Somebody could shoot our rep an email and say, you know, something's changed. Let's cut this. Let's cut that. Let's add this, whatever. Then you have the user input issue of updating that in the POS system. And then there's all these other things that play into it, such as margin credits, which have become a much more significant factor in the post-pandemic world. After all of this discounting and whatnot, you know, we're retailers. We have to stick up for ourselves. We have to make sure the data is accurate and we're being compensated appropriately. That's margin credits. There's labor credits. There's, you know, meeting your terms, right? So your shipping has been wiped, whatever. But that's all already fed through your accounting software. So when you go to audit all these things, in my case, with numerous vendors, but not all, some are fantastic in their B2B applications. But fragmented data has been my real struggle. So, you know, you look up a sales order, right? That could have 10 invoices attached to it. Those invoices are then fragmented because they contain items from the initial sales order you're looking for, a subsequent sales order, and so on. And then at the bottom, you have shipping all lumped into one sum, your environmental recycling fees all lumped into one sum. So ultimately, you know, I have a ton of notes here, but I don't want to waste everybody's time. But, you know, we're dealing with large companies in most cases. And the way I see it is they could at least aggregate data in a way that is more useful and then does not require hours of manipulation, cross-referencing from PDF emails, B2B printouts, account statements, all that, and then comparing them against your margin credits, your labor credits, and all that fun stuff, which is an issue in itself because I'm seeing a lot of these brands aren't officially tracking these credits, right? They'll send me a snapshot of a personal spreadsheet that they made. And I'm not going to trust that, right? I'm a business owner. I need to be certain that my data is accurate and that we're not being shafted, frankly. And, you know, this is becoming more of a problem, requiring more frequent audits. And, you know, it's spiraling a bit. So, you know, simple solution, and I'm not going to name brands, but one brand that we use is fantastic. They're B2B. You open a sales order, all your historical sales orders are there. They each have a drop down. Within that drop down will be the exact invoices associated with that sales order. And then they will be updated retroactively with any margin credits, labor credits, all associated under the same drop down. It is incredibly easy. You can match it against your accounts payable, your bank statements, blah, 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 your internal trackers. And I really, I hope that most retailers are staying on top of these kinds of things, especially since margin credits have become a much bigger factor in this post pandemic world where, you know, prices have been slashed every month. So yeah, ultimately I'm here because I'm curious as to how other people might manage these things,
Thank you, Ian.
because it's a significant time investment.
Thank you, Ian. It's really beneficial, I think, to hear from a retailer who's working with a B2B every single day. And I do like how you point out the friction spot. Again, echoing your comments that there's certain brands who are doing things that make it really easy for you. And what retailers are chiming in the question and A is that the retailers or the brands that are doing a great job, fantastic. We should tell more people about those brands who have great B2Bs. And if your brand doesn't have the functionality that you're looking for as a retailer, don't be afraid to suggest what other brands are doing and ask for the changes you need. And as Rob stated, you'll either get a yes or a no, but at least the brand will know what your feedback is. In the sake of time to move on, I want to make sure I get some more comments and thoughts on this. Paul, did you have?
Yeah, I think this is relevant to everything that we've discussed here. You know, Rob mentioned using Lightning as a solution. I believe that's part of New Order. I think that we are going to see a lot better B2B platforms come to fruition. Shopify is, you know, a lot of brands use Shopify, and Shopify is also bringing out their B2B platform, which should make it more consistent and easier to use across the board. But in this meeting, we talked a lot about some things that I think lead into the B2B stuff well, and that was, you know, more efficient inventories, how forecasting plays in with preseason orders. We talked about rising shipping costs across the board and how hard it was to pull that out of the equation to incentivize retailers. We talked about the cost of capital and how that has gone up, and we don't know when or if that will go down again without a really poor economy, you know. And then and someone mentioned sales reps and how sales reps might only show up once a year. And, you know, this is really where the rubber meets the road on B2B. Sales reps are also dealing with all these higher costs when they go on the road, fuel, hotels, everything. So even larger and larger brands are having a harder and harder time to get that sort of human, you know, human interaction within the retailer. So that raises the question: how do you, as a supplier, you know, how do you form and build and grow really strong partnerships with your retail base? And I think the solution is going to have to be by more uptake of B2B platforms, more usage by you know, bicycle dealers, because that is really the only way that we can resolve some of these cost challenges that we're all being faced with, is just more efficiency in that space, in the supply chain, and removing the friction, all of that friction in between. So use the B2Bs, continue to adopt B2Bs with your key partners, and help each other improve that B2B experience. And really, you know, I think that the distributors like QBP here have always done a great job and continue to do a great job with that. So certainly there are other ways to reduce that friction, and suppliers just continue to try to find ways to make it easier for dealers to get the product and have a better experience.
Yeah, thank you for that, Paul. You know, COVID, I think as an industry, taught us the importance of technology and data. And I think we've been just kind of trying to catch up quickly, like almost too quickly since then. And I applaud what the industry has done in this short time. Ian, this is a great topic, and your presentation looks very thorough, and you spent a lot of time on it. And I apologize that I don't have a length of time to allow you to continue, but I would love, I'm very happy to have this topic presented. And I think the feedback here that the panel is giving is, please, retailers, talk to your brands and let's refine the B2B as much as we possibly can to make just everything streamlined moving forward. Ian, did you have any other thoughts just in conclusion? Again, my apologies again for interrupting you.
Not that's nothing that's worthy of too many more of all of your time. Thank you for having me here.
We are thrilled you are, and we welcome your inclusion at future events as well. Very, very thoughtful presentation you put together. We have reached time today, so I'd like to, as we typically do, turn it over to Kent Cranford, NBDA board member, to recap the three very important topics today, and then we'll move to close out for today. Kent?
Thanks, Heather. And coming from the actual war zone here, I lost internet and power in the middle of this. So all of my notes I was taking are now on a dark screen. But but as I was listening to Paul, he actually recaptured all of the whole topics that we had just done beautifully. And so I'm not going to restate what he just stated, but ultimately everything that we've covered today really kind of all gels together into one. And so Paul, you did a great job on that, and I appreciate it. So I'm going to leave it at that. And Heather, if there's anything you want to add, I think it's been covered.
No, that's fantastic. And thank you, Kent, again, for what you're doing for your community and for your time today. Just for our attendees and our panel members, as Rob Kaplan so graciously mentioned at the top of that hour here, this panel event is great. The panel members are fantastic. The retailer attendees, we need your voice. We'd love to have more brands, more suppliers, more retailers join in the conversation. We really want to make the impact of these collective efforts far-reaching. So our next panel event, every quarter we do have one. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please invite your friends to join. Anyone could be added as a panel member. Just reach out to me, Heather at nbda.com. We are recording today's event, and we will place this on the NBDA YouTube channel within 24 hours. So if you had to step away, you'll be able to view it in completion. We'll also extract the audio, and you can hear that as a podcast feature on Bicycle Retail Radio. Thank you all for being here. I hope you have an excellent afternoon, and I appreciate all the attendees as well who chimed in. Thank you, panel members.
Thanks, Heather.
Thanks, Heather.